the way, I also had a men's retreat on Saturday, and I did 5 hours of one-on-ones and then 5 masses on Sunday. So I'm cranky,
All
fired
right.
up. But hey,
Well, welcome to Liturgy Live with a cranky Father Ian. So it might be an interesting one. Should stick around, see if he gets all fired up about it. We will be doing the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. My name is Alanna Burg, and I already said Father Ian Van Husen. So let's get going. How are you? Besides what you're doing?
no, I'm just
Everything
kidding.
good?
I'm pretty
Yeah.
calm today. The
Get
work
them hooked with maybe
getting
some
his hopes up.
drama.
What's that?
I said we'll hook them with the possibility of drama.
Exactly.
You never know what's going to happen on the live stream.
You never know. Right. Just get fired up. Start railing.
All right. Well, I'm going to read Wisdom.
Yeah.
First reading. God did not make death, nor does he rejoice in the destruction of the living. For he fashioned all things that they might have being, and the creatures of the world are wholesome, and there is not destructive drug among them, nor any domain of the netherworld on earth, for justice is undying. For God formed man to be imperishable. The image of his own nature he made him. But the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and they who belong to his company experience it. Okay.
Yeah.
So wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So right before it says God did not make death, it says, do not court death by your erring way of life, nor draw to yourselves destruction by the works of your hands. I thought that was relevant in my
that's pretty good
reading.
stuff. So, jumping into a little bit. Well, do you have an idea first? I have several ideas brewing. Okay. Jump in. So the whole idea of active versus permissive will, this is a really difficult concept that people struggle with, especially when they read the Old Testament, because in one regard, when we're talking about his active and his permissive will, all things fall under God's providence. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been reflecting on predestination, active, permissive will, and I'm finding a lot of fruit and meditating on it. Yes, I'm weird. This is like my prayer life. Deal with it. I'm just on Monday mood. Just deal with it. I'm intellectual. I'm heady. Don't you women be? No.
Oh, no. Here we go. We lost everybody.
Did we?
No, it's cranky. Well, a few people, but crankiness. Okay.
Well, sometimes this is just a personal aside.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is very devastating for some men, and this is like a kind of insider baseball thing, is when men are told that an intellectual prayer life is not spiritual enough and that they don't have a relationship with Jesus. And it's like, some people are just hardwired differently, and just deal with it.
Yeah,
and
there are different spiritual lives. So like this, all of the saints are different. It's okay.
Exactly. Just because somebody doesn't sit down and say, I just see Jesus gazing on me with love and tender. That's a great experience for you. I'm glad. And that's a good thing to have. And I have experiences like that as well. But sometimes my greatest experiences are pondering God's active and permissive will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes when things click together, ideas click together in the brain, is like, that's a great, consolation.
Exactly. It's a great meditation. Mm-hmm. And it's a great way of drawing closer to God. Mm-hmm. It's not like, for it to be prayer and for it to be relational, it doesn't have to be the stereotype of relational. Like, I gazed into his eyes with love and tenderness, and I felt him looking back on me, and I just knew how much I was loved. Now, those things are bad, but a little too much. There's a little bit too much of that in the church. So that's a long tangent. Sorry. I told you I was cranky.
Oh, it's going to be a fun day. So what about active wisdom?
Permissive will? Okay, yeah. But with active and permissive will, it's really striking is in the Old Testament, it is common to see all things as coming from God. And the idea of divine providence, the traditional teaching on it, is that it is proper to think of all things as being allowed or done by God for the greater glory, but that God never loses. So in all things, now this can be a difficult teaching for some people. I do a lot of counseling one-on-one time with people, as many of you probably know, and probably you definitely know, Alanna. And I'm not saying that like when the person has just like lost their child in a terrible accident, you say, well, God allowed it for a greater good. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Right. But setting that aside, it can be a great way of surrendering to divine providence to recognize that God either does it or allows it, but God never loses. Right. So God allows death for a greater good. And the scriptures point to this. And that's I would say the best way to understand this passage. But he allows it. And I think a good way of thinking of permissive will, as a parent, do you intentionally at times allow your kids to experience failure or to experience pain when they're doing something they shouldn't? But it's like a measured, like I was thinking about this. I'm trying to think of a way, like you see your kid doing something and you're like, I could stop them, but if they suffer the consequence of this action, it'll probably help them in the long run. I'm trying to think of like, I don't know.
You try, but it really is painful as a parent to also have to go through the rest of that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it really is a balancing act of all of that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But I mean, as a parent, can you think of a situation where you've allowed your kid to experience something that you could have potentially prevented, but it was medicinal / helpful for them?
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't remember a specific thing off the top of my head, but I'm sure I have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept, right? These concepts are not so abstract, actually.
Most of it is about, I think it would be about lying. Like, you sure you want to, like, if you lie, it's going to be a hard, like.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, well, okay, well, then this is how it's going to be because there's lying. And that's pretty severely punished.
Yeah, as it should be. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on this whole active and permissive will? I'm really struck by how a lot of people don't know it. Well, I shouldn't be struck by that. That's part of what you do as a teacher, is you teach people about things they don't.
I think I connected more to when you just were talking about providence, and I think it'll connect also to the second reading, but how God provides the goodness of everything for us, and that it was ruined by the devil, but he will then provide the greatest good through that anyways.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because we were not created for the death that that has been experienced. We were created imperishable in his image, so that's important to remember, I think.
Yeah. When they often talk about in that regard, that God allows death because if it wasn't for death, we might not turn to him. We wouldn't be brought back into relationship with him. That's why he allows these evil things. But it is, I got actually shift around I was trying to do an angle. But then it's just not working with the chair. Okay, there we go.
Okay. It's not comfortable.
So,
okay. So I was thinking also that like he did not make death, and he does not rejoice in the destruction of the living. Like, this is not how it was supposed to go, but he can create, can make things to his glory. So forever he will be glorified. Right.
Yeah.
That's why I like the beginning part.
There's a weird concept because, I mean, technically he knew all of this would happen too. So, I mean, this is kind of the mystery of foreknowledge, and God's foreknowledge is perfect knowledge. So, yeah.
Because he restored, and I think also in the gospel we'll see that his restoration of life is where he rejoices in, right? Not the destruction of the, like, that's not where his glory comes from. It comes from his like bringing back to life the people, especially in the gospels.
Absolutely.
It's where we see the reflection.
It's really it is fascinating how the scripture works. And I'd be curious if Aquinas deals with this particular passage.
And there's a whole chapter in between these two little cuts of So it's like they go on about, and it talks about like how the evil man thinks. It's really
Yeah.
interesting. So it's kind of cutting in between. There's cutting a lot out of understanding. So
Yeah. It's really fascinating is this idea, going back to this active and permissive will. It's really a hard thing to wrap your mind around, is the sense that it's somewhat paradoxical, because
mm-hmm,
God allows death in a certain sense. By allowing it, he chooses, permits it.
mm-hmm,
And permitting and allowing something is a kind of choice. Nothing falls outside of God's providence, but he doesn't actively will it. But at the same time, because I mean, the way you said it said God did not want death. That's a little bit tricky.
well, he doesn't make death, and he does not rejoice
Yeah, that's
in
the
destruction. Yeah.
yeah.
So it's he rejoices in his ability to still be glorified in coming
Yeah,
to us in Christ, right?
of course, in a completely analogous way as well. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
this probably gets into a little heavy theology. There's actually no way out of it unless you kind of like start throwing out terms. And
Yeah. Wisdom is difficult
that's why we avoid
quickly.
that. But this is the beauty. I mean, I will say this: if somebody right now is a little bit confused and they're like, there are really good answers to these things.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is you have to make distinctions, and the way you make those distinctions sometimes are very abstract, and it can be just
Mm-hmm.
very hard to wrap your mind around. And some
Mm-hmm.
of them are somewhat paradoxical, like
Yeah.
God's active and permissive will. I mean, it really, and one of the things, so this is a big thing I've been thinking about a lot lately when it comes to the truths of the faith, is there's hearing something for the first time, there's understanding it intellectually, and then there's integrating it into the core of who you are, the
Mm-hmm.
things. Because as I'm a priest and more I teach about these things, and I pray about them and I meditate on them, I'm amazed. One, I'm amazed how they change me over time. But two, I'm amazed that some people have the intellectual understanding of them, but they have not integrated them. So,
Mm.
um, like, so the idea that everything falls under divine providence, God has a plan, and that in these aspects, there are people who understand the theology of that, and then they will turn around, and I'm probably guilty of this as much as the next person, and they'll worry about what's going to happen with their assignment. Like my brother priest, right? I have friends who are theologians, right? And we'll talk about predestination, we'll talk about God's providence, and we'll speak with precision. And then in the next minute, we're like, I'm just concerned about what's going to happen if this happens or that happens. And you kind of think to yourself afterwards, every now and then, I'm like, did we not connect the dots of what we were talking about? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just talking about the fact that like God already knows everything and has a plan for everything. Right. And yet we somehow, on an experiential level, and that's a part of the human experience, it can't be completely done away with.
It's also that particular thing is so hard to integrate. I think that's one of the harder things to integrate is
definitely.
You don't have to worry. But then it's like, I don't know the plan. Like God has the plan. That's great. I have no idea what my role in this plan is. And that kind of freaks me out.
Well, then, I mean, the Blessed Virgin Mary, she kind of experienced anxiety when Jesus was in the temple.
Right.
12 years old. So it's like, well, how do I mean, so,
right.
I mean, but
the plan will glorify God. It might not always mean not suffering for me. It'll probably mean suffering.
Yeah. That's, so going back to that, I mean, this passage, God did not create death, nor does he rejoice and rejoice in our death.
Right.
But he allows it for a greater good. Don't pine after death.
Right. And we
can like kind of yada yada that. I mean, remember the whole episode of Seinfeld. I don't know if we can reference that. Yeah. We can yada yada these things, right? Oh yeah, yada yada. God didn't create death. That's right, because God's rainbows and clouds and unicorns and God's fluffy. So yeah, God didn't create death because he just wants us all to be happy. Wait, pause for a second. No. Think about this a little more.
Yeah, it needs to be, God didn't make death, but it is a reality that we live in, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying to us, the envy of the devil, then death entered the world, right? So maybe also, what does envy have to do with it, right? What does envy have to do with all of the things that we were just told were good,
Yeah.
that were wholesome,
Well,
we're
you
not
want,
destructive.
I mean, have you ever pondered, I've been thinking about this a lot. And then St. Paul says, the law became death for me. And it's like this idea of dying. And then so it kind of almost reverses this a little bit, right? Like you don't
And that
pine
he
for
still
death,
has,
but
God
you
still
die.
has the power over death,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, actually, this is kind of actually is more perplexing when you think about this whole idea of that Jesus says that you must die. The idea of dying with Christ.
And in this part of the wisdom, the part that's not that you don't read is actually talks about the evil one who says he will say he's the son of God, and we will test him, and we will say that you will stop yourself from suffering. It's like very much like on the
That part.
cross.
That's
So that's the part of the wisdom
Oh yeah,
that they
that's one
cut
of my
out.
favorite parts. I actually use that part a lot with people who, when they're trying to make sense of evil, like people who are jealous or hate them or trying to destroy them. And you read that, you're like, there are people that they see the good that you do, they see the positive impact you have, and it bothers them, and they hate you for it. And that's what that passage gets at, right? That's the
And
very like striking thing. If
yeah,
you've ever encountered that where you're like, yeah,
it's very questioning and divisive in that way. So it's very, and it's interesting because a lot of it, I think envy is there's a lot of envy right now, a lot of envy.
yeah.
And I think that really dives deeper into the human condition and how do we engage with each other, because we don't engage in the way that we are created, wholesome, right? Our culture is not wholesome. So
I find it really fascinating connecting with this is the inability in popular media and online conversations for people simply to try to engage with the person that's talking to them on and try to understand what they're actually saying versus reading into it, adding layers of stuff. It's
I find that I haven't been engaging very much lately, but when I find that I was a cardboard cutout of who they thought I was.
yeah.
Like that's how they were engaging with me. And I'm like, I didn't say any of these things, but there's all these assumptions of who I am. You know what I mean? Within what I'm saying, I'm like, whoa, that's weird.
Yeah.
Like it's easier to be like, this person fits in this box, and then I'm going to treat you like this box, and then you're on the other end of that, and you're like, you're not even listening to like that's not what I said at all. Like that's not even the same topic
like
of
if
what
you
I
if you were
said.
doing a reading comprehension examination in middle school, you would have failed.
Yeah.
The teacher would be like, you did not understand the author.
You also responded not in any way, shape, or form on the topic. Did you read this? Just kind of like, well, that was a weird interaction. Like, what are you talking about? So, but it's very much a character, right?
We laugh about it, but I mean, it might be something as simple as a good percentage of people online conversations don't actually have like reading comprehension skills. I mean,
and also it is now it's like other people are characters that they play, in your mind. Like this person is this character and they believe that, there's like an assumption, and that's how people treat each other instead of reading to understand, and knowing the other person. I already know what you think, and I'm going just to read to like fight with you about it, and that's
and the name calling. It's pretty funny with my YouTube. Have you seen my video? Yes, Protestantism is a heresy. Have you
that was
seen
a
that
few
one?
years
It's
ago, right?
an old one.
Yeah.
I get at least one troll comment a day on that. It's so funny because it's like, I mean, if you watch the video, I'm about as friendly as can be. I'm like, guys, I totally did this title to trigger you. I don't think that like non-denominational Protestants are bad people, but like, how do we understand heresy, right? And just understanding heresy. And I kind of talk about that. I mean, exactly the way I'm doing it right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean,
they don't even watch the video. They just comment, right?
Some watch the video. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's really funny. I mean, yeah, it's just pretty funny that the reactions. I mean, it's our top performing video. We got like 13,000 views on it. Not top. We have ones that have done more than that. But it actually I screwed up when I did it on my own. I didn't do it with Tim. I just pulled out my camera and did it. It's actually one of my worst produced videos. It's kind of funny. I made a mistake.
Clickbait works.
Exactly, it does.
All right.
Yeah, but we know.
You ready for second reading?
Yeah, let's jump in the second reading.
All right, from 2 Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, as you excel in every respect in faith, discourse, knowledge, all earnestness, and in the love we have for you, may you excel in this gracious act also. For you know the gracious act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. Not that others should have relief while you are burdened, but that is a matter of equality. Your abundance at the present time should supply their needs, so that their abundance may also supply your needs, that there may be equality. As it is written, whoever had much did not have more, and whoever had little did not have less. Okay, so there's a lot to go in here. And also,
here's a question for you. Hopefully this isn't too personal. When you look around at your possessions and things that you have, and I can start off this, I don't really want a bigger house. Like I don't want more things. I will say I have a weak spot for like vestments and art, but not necessarily for myself. I just like the satisfaction of creating things, which I don't think is necessarily the same thing as possessing them. But even then, I mean, I thought about going without those things if I was called to it. But it's really striking how profoundly in America. So, Jordan Peterson points this out, and by even saying Jordan Peterson, everybody's like, "I knew it! He was conservative." But anyways, but Jordan Peterson gets at he talks about an insight he had that, and I knew this. He said, if you make over $35,000, you're in the top 1% of the world in terms of income. And what
we are the 1% of the 1%.
Yes. And then beyond, and then there's like the 1% of the 1% is like, but compared to most of the world, most Americans live a lifestyle that's unimaginable to the rest of the world. Right. And to be fair, I mean, this is why it's really hard, because sometimes when I work with Hispanic ministry and people are like, oh, all the Mexicans, they're really Hispanics, but it's mostly Mexicans. Oh, they're really poor. Like they have a trailer park. And I'm like, man, if you've been to where they're from in Mexico, they're like, we made it big, they got a truck, they got AC, they got hot water. Like that was unheard of, like in most parts of Mexico. Like they're like, we're living large. I mean, they have struggles, they have anxieties. I'm not saying that but they recognize the economic prosperity of what they're experiencing. Ironically, though, that doesn't necessarily solve all their problems. It's kind of interesting.
Well, yes, because more money, more problems. But I feel like that's accurate. I mean, Jesus didn't say that, but I feel like it's fairly accurate.
But it was interesting. I was talking once with a young adult group about these prosperity ideas in the Old Testament. And one time, because I was all ready to say that, like, because early on I had this idea, and actually through the laity and through Aquinas, I was corrected of it, that the Old Testament was somehow outdated in regards to the New. I mean, I wouldn't have put it exactly that way, but and one of those ideas was that the Old Testament idea that God blesses you with abundance and with material blessings. And one person said something, I can't remember the passage, they said, basically tied in with this, that you can be blessed with things, but you also have to be blessed with the ability to enjoy them. Right?
Yeah, because they could be your destruction, right?
Yeah.
And you can have many things and still live a life of severe, like, just loneliness, and just like look like it's nothing, it means nothing. So
Well, there's all kinds of funny studies, right? You could have 100 rooms in your mansion. I think they say that no matter what, all humans will only live in 1 or 2 rooms. Like
hmm,
you can't. There's something about the way we are as human beings that we don't want that much space. Now, for some families, it might be good for your kids. Actually, I don't know if it's good. It might be something that's nice for your kids for each of them to have their own room. I mean, obviously, it can be tough if boys and girls have to stay in the same room. That's obviously a problem.
yeah.
Yeah, but outside of that, like having the difference between having one room where you have a little bit of privacy versus like 5 is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if the culture or if how we perceive the world and life and everything in it revolves around happiness equals things that you have, you know, it's you will always find nothing. You know, you will never be happy within that
Mhm.
because then you won't have enough ever. There will never be enough to fill that void, you know? And then when we strive for a virtue and we strive, you know, to do things for others and to live in the way that God calls us to live generously, um, then that's where the service is where the happiness comes from, right? The giving of yourself, just like Christ gave of himself, like that's where the joy comes from, and that is very countercultural. You know,
Yeah.
it is in the receiving that the culture thinks that's where happiness comes from, not in
Yeah.
the giving.
No, agreed. Agreed.
And one of the things that in this reading, there's one line that's for some reason cut out, which I don't agree with, but it doesn't matter what I think. I'm going to read it for you anyways because it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's verse 8. I say this not by way of command, but to test the genuineness of your love by your concern for others. So this is not commanding this action. This is not by decree of force or on pain of sin. This is, do you love another in a way that you could do this, right? Sometimes these types of readings can be read as in like, see, this is commanded to do this, right? Like it could change your understanding on taking that verse out. I think could change understanding of what he's saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I got into this debate once with a friend of mine. It was a friend from college. Both of us were non-practicing Christians when we met in college. He's now a liberal Protestant pastor. And I mentioned to him the idea that's pretty standard and traditional, that virtue does not come from compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
Virtue oftentimes exceeds what is strictly required. And he said, well, what about the 10 Commandments or whatever? But really, I mean, I didn't fire back at the time, but really the 10 Commandments are like a threshold morality, but
I mean, the virtue of obedience is by obeying certain things, the virtue of obedience grows, but by doing things on request, there's different forms of virtue can grow.
Well, yeah, and obedience, if you look at, I don't know how Aquinas deals with obedience as a virtue. I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that the virtue of obedience is much more than just obeying what your authority tells you to do.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
is desire to obey.
Desire to obey and what's best for the leader and for the group. So there actually could hypothetically be a circumstance in which you disobey an authority because you know it to be the best and you know that it's in the best intention of the leader. Right.
But that takes, I wouldn't do that willingly. I wouldn't tell lay people to just disobey authority willy-nilly.
Well, yeah.
I mean, like just for our audience, just that takes great virtue and discernment to, and depending on, of course, what it is,
Well, a good example, and I think it depends on your abilities to discern. But okay, let's say McDonald's has a policy. I was just at McDonald's for my Diet Cokes. There you go. I'm like there. I'm buying like Coke in bulk, so I'm not going to McDonald's as much anymore. But
just stop.
I love my caffeine. Love my caffeine. So anyway, so like let's say like McDonald's has a policy that you can give no refills, right? and you're the frontline worker, and you can't give any refills, and they have to buy a whole new drink. They don't have this policy, but I'm just saying hypothetically.
Yeah.
And you're like the frontline worker, and somebody came in and, like, let's say they're having a really bad day and they're really distraught and they're kind of crying at the table while they're eating, and they come up to get a drink, and you're like, oh, technically we don't give free refills. And they're like, I don't have any more money. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's in the business's best interest for the employee to say, you know what, our policy is no free refills, but here you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that isn't the situation that I was thinking. I was thinking more of a spiritual authority, like disobeying a spiritual authority is the way I was thinking. I was like, whoa, like, slow down.
Well, I think that's where sometimes our way of philosophizing and theologizing about these things is not particularly helpful, right?
Yeah.
And the classic one in American society is everybody says online that censorship is a bad thing. Everybody agrees that certain things should be censored. We all believe this. There are certain things that should not be shown in any format. They're so terrible and horrendous that they should be censored. Now, if you start with, and you can go to the most extreme case and you go, yeah, clearly that should be censored, right? I don't want to say any of them, but you can imagine we could probably make something up on the fly that we'd all agree. And like I was doing my my comprehension exams on natural law, and they were talking about natural law, and I was like, I everybody believes, and so we were talking about intrinsic evil. I said everybody believes that there are some things that are intrinsically evil. The question is not if you believe there's intrinsic evil, but the difference is what. Now, if you start with things like controversial hot button issues, yeah, there's a lot of disagreement. But like torturing puppies, we all agree you should not torture puppies. Yeah. I don't think there's anybody who thinks that's a good idea, right? That's something Republicans and Democrats can agree on.
Yeah, or it's like child human trafficking.
Exactly.
Bad. Like, and nobody's for. I mean, if you are for that, bad.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody, and so shameful that nobody would ever publicly admit it. And they're probably a sociopath, right? And then
horrible. Okay, so one of the things that I think also is intrinsic to your understanding of that is confession, because you have to censor yourself because of the grace of the sacrament and the seal of the sacrament of confession, right? And that's for a good of another. That's a form of self-censorship, but it's
definitely
it's for the good of the community, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
where did this come from now? For a second there I was like, this is fun, and then like I was, as we were talking, I was like, what about the reading again?
Well, we have a question.
Oh yeah, shoot. I think there was a progression. I'll have to go back and watch it later, which I probably won't do. But
it says, I would like to know your thoughts on the priests who know that abortion is sinful, but bishops want them to speak out.
Yeah, or
do you go with a sin or obey your authority?
Yeah, so this is like the classic right now because of the Eucharistic coherence. I feel comfortable fielding this. Actually, this is kind of fun. We're a half hour in, so only our true fans are listening at this point. We know who you are. You're definitely not the Vicar General, though. No, I think a lot of it. I mean, to be fair to all parties, it's a political issue, so it's a question of prudence and timing. Now, I don't think we should. It's not fair to project on people bad intentions unless you know otherwise. Also, it's naive to think that all priests and all bishops have 100% pure good intentions. I mean, I know for a fact, I won't say who, and maybe I shouldn't admit this out loud, but I have looked up the voting record of some bishops. Like, you can actually find what party they're registered. It's actually, there was an app that allowed you to do it. So everybody's like, whoa. but there's definitely a few bishops that are registered Democrats. Obviously there's some registered Republican. And this is public information. So I'm surprised. I hope journalists don't start reporting on that part. It seems like an unwritten rule that you don't report on what party somebody's registered. But anyways, so it's clear that there's some bishops who are registered Democrats and they're registered Republicans. The question is, why? What's their intention? And I think we should, I think when we're dealing with these debates, we should assume some level of certain good intent. We should give people the benefit of the doubt, at least in a public way. Like this is kind of a public way. It would not be appropriate for me to call into intention and to call into question the intentions of a brother priest or a bishop publicly. I might talk about it privately for the sake of processing it, things like that. And I think, and the laity, I think we should involve the same thing. I think this is also one of the key principles of the ancient world, and that in civil discourse that's been lost in modern times, is a sense of decorum, that you don't make ad hominem attacks, and that you address the issues. That being said, I don't know if that was answering anything. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but does that make sense, Alanna? It's a little bit
it doesn't directly address exactly what she's talking about, but it kind of does, in a roundabout way. You have to, as priests, you have sworn to obey the authority of your bishop in ordination. So I would err on the side of obedience as a virtue, but because even like Saint Teresa of Avila, who was having her mystical experiences, it gained more grace by obeying her authority that told her not to do that, not to engage in the mystical experiences in those moments. He was wrong, right? But she obeyed him, and it gained her more graces, and it gained her even more spiritual consolation. So it's kind of backwards thinking in the ways of the world, right? Like the ways of faith and of God and of all of how grace works and all of that. It's kind of, sometimes I have to turn everything upside down and like look at it from different angles to say like, okay. Sometimes we don't see things.
Let's just on a hypothetical. Technically, my bishop did not command any of us priests not to talk about abortion or not to talk about the nature of some of these political issues. They give us broad guidelines not to endorse a candidate, not to things like that in terms of the election. I think on a personal reason, why do I choose not to focus on the hot button issues is one of the key principles when it comes to American politics that I apply to myself, and I apply to my parishioners, and I apply in spiritual direction, is that the one of the aspects of democracy that sometimes gets a little twisted is that we think that we have a lot more power than we do. In reality, in our system, our power consists of every 2 years we have an election, and we get to vote for candidates. And then every 4 years we get to vote for the president. Some people don't vote every 2 years because they only vote every 4 years. Some people don't vote at all. Outside of that, I feel like the constant debates, the constant clickbait stuff is more to fuel revenue for news agencies. I often tell people who are close to me and who share a similar viewpoint, and I think it's kind of obvious what my viewpoint might be, is I already know how I'm going to vote for the foreseeable future. Unless something dramatically changes, which I don't foresee it, I kind of know my decisions. So if I know my decisions, I don't need to keep thinking about the reasons why. Now I stay abreast of issues just so I can be somewhat informed, but in a very minimal way. And so in the same way with preaching, let's say you take the view, which I think I can say comfortably, I say that moral relativism is a huge problem. LGBTQ stuff is disconcerting. I'm always support people with same-sex attraction, things like that. There seems to be a problem with this, that it's being thrust upon people. And you take all these kind of cultural issues and you take a view that the secular culture is becoming radically anti-Christian. The answer is not getting your young people and the people in your life mad as possible, and angry all the time. It's about building an authentic culture, which would be building up skills of intellectual life, logic, rhetoric, stuff that really doesn't excite the passions and is not very controversial, and equipping people. And in some ways, they're things that are somewhat neutral, right? I mean, teaching somebody about logic or rhetoric does not persuade them to vote Democrat or Republican. But I would argue that if my views are truly good, true, and beautiful and correct, I don't have to force somebody to agree with me. But that if we discover truth and we explore truth, and I give them the skills and that they will discover the same answers that I have found. I often said that actually to my high school students once. I said, I don't have to force my opinion on you, because I believe that if I equip you on how to understand truth, that you will come to the same conclusions that I have. That makes sense?
Yeah, totally does. And there's a few more questions, but we need to get to
the gospel.
So I apologize for that.
I've been kind of talking a little bit more than you, Alanna, this time. I'm a little sorry about that.
Okay, I don't keep track of minutes or anything. I just like it when we have good conversations, because that's what the point is. I'm excited to get into the gospel though, because I have the comparisons between the two stories. So it's long, so bear with me. From the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please come lay your hands on her, that she may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed upon him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors, and had spent all that she had. Yet she was not helped but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately her flow of blood dried up. She felt it in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to Jesus, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around and to see who had done it. The woman, realizing that what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside, except our Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. When they arrived at the house, the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion of people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why is this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him. Then he put them all out. He took along the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, arose immediately and walked around, and at that they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and said that she should be given something to eat. So that was long, but it's from the Gospel of Mark. Mark writes in intercolations, which are two stories that inform each other. Do you have anything to say before
I've got some ideas.
Get my notes in?
But Yeah, throw some stuff in there then.
Okay, so the two stories actually have a lot in common. The the little girl who's dying and the woman who is basically as good as dead because she spent 12 years as an outcast because of her health issues. Um, Jairus is his daughter, and Jesus calls the woman daughter. And then the dad falls at Jesus's feet in the beginning when he begs, and the woman falls at Jesus's feet and tells him afterwards. The girl is 12 years old, and the woman was suffering for 12 years. They were both healed. Um, Jesus takes the hand of the daughter, and the woman touches Jesus to get healed, and the father's faith made her had faith so that the girl would live, and the faith of the woman brought about her, helped with her healing. So those were the things that were I had notes on.
Cool.
That the story within the
story.
You
want me to throw a little?
Yeah.
Wrench? Okay.
Wrench into, you're throwing a wrench?
Well, this is actually something I've been researching lately, so this will be fun. So what Jesus is saying is, don't rely on medicine, but rely on your faith. Don't go to the doctor, go to your priest.
Perfect. Check.
No, but this is a contemporary problem. This is a contemporary problem, especially with mental health, with psychiatry, for example. And I think I'm going to talk about this weekend because I've been researching this because this has popped up, especially among traditionalist folks. If you haven't picked up on it, I'm sure you have. I'm sure everybody else has. I do tend to have a lot of folks that I'm connected with that are more into Latin Mass, traditional minded. Just tends to be part of the group that I work with a lot. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of concerns about should we listen to psychiatrists and psychologists? And of course, there are always bad psychologists and bad psychiatrists, but some people argue that psychiatry and the idea of medicine as such, the modern understanding of medicine began 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or the Enlightenment, or whatever. Not true. So I've been researching medieval medicine and the ancient view of medicine. And so I don't know for certain. I think Luke was a physician. Mm-hmm. So some of the text I'm reading would have been part of his worldview. And it was clear in the ancient world that they did have an understanding of a biological component of things like depression and other things like that. And I could show you the sources, but they definitely viewed that there was mental health issues that were caused by biology.
Yes. And also, like, we can understand our thought process better by talking to other people or by learning how the psychologists think about things, or psychiatrists. Not necessarily that all of them are good. Like you said, some of them are bad, right? But we are able to recognize patterns and understand we recognize, right? Like we just come upon things that have already been thought by the mind of God, right? And so the patterns that we go through and all of that, we can recognize and respond to and change our behavior patterns, and that's not something that's against church teaching, but there's a lot of thought of like, well, this is bad.
Yeah. Just have faith. Just have faith, and you'll be miraculously healed every time.
Mm-hmm. And I know like 3 years ago, or 2018, when we started talking, like I know that we went into how I had to take medication even to get better.
We've talked about
this. Yeah. So, and I'm not on medication anymore, but my body needed to remember what the right amount of like mental hormones and chemical imbalance things were, and then I was like, oh, this is how people feel. Normal people. This is you're supposed to feel.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes
sense. People
who
criticize that choice? Like, did you have
not to my face?
But did you hear that they criticized you?
No, I mean, like, I
have anybody said that
you
should pray more, or you should.
I spent a long time doing that to myself.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
it was me that was like, I just don't have enough faith. Like that was me to myself. Like,
yeah,
and then it made to the point where I was like, I have a lot of faith, and this is still a problem.
yeah,
This is, I already have like food issues, so it's like I probably should go and talk to an actual doctor about what's happening.
exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, John of the Cross talks about the biological component of things like depression.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's called melancholy. If you're looking it up in the and they yeah, they actually actually, it's really not. What I'm discovering as I research this is things that I was taught are Thomistic are really not Thomistic. They're not unique to St. Thomas. There's just an ancient understanding of things. Like concepts I've seen in the Summa 100 times that I studied, I see in some of these medical books. I'm like, oh, and these are like, and it's not. And here's the crazy part: it
just
wasn't
collated
Christian.
it all.
Yeah, he brought it all together. I mean, I'm appreciating that more and more as I study these ancient sources. That's another side topic, but the 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 source of a lot of this understanding of the psychology and biology was not the Bible. It was not Hebrew. It was Greek. It was clearly Greek. And there was different revolutions in Greek medicine. Greek medicine was, and if you're trying to understand a modern version of Greek medicine, Indian medicine, the Ayurvedic stuff, the yoga stuff, all that, very much like the Greek medicine. And similar philosophy, by the way, Neoplatonism. Yeah. So and they had views like, have you ever heard any of these ideas? I mean, they're really popular right now in America, like that different foods have different effects on you psychologically. Like some are calmings. I mean, we talk about this in a lot of ways, but a lot of these ideas the Greeks had. The reason why we didn't learn about these growing up is because for the most part, Western medicine was supplanted by the scientific method.
Gotta trust the
Around the
science.
time, yeah. But that wasn't a bad thing. That's why we have advances.
I'm just laughing because
yeah,
culture.
yeah, no, but because I had this insight that I believe that the Indian stuff that's popular, especially was popular when I was on the left wing, we had the same thing in the West, but that it was from the medieval times, and I've been validated in that intuition.
Yeah, it's okay to take medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, and they had different ideas. I mean, we see St. Martin de Porres, rosemary was a big thing with him. I have a benefactor who wants us to consider planting some rosemary in honor of St. Martin de Porres. He used a lot of rosemary.
I love rosemary. Yeah. I have some in my little tiny pot.
But yeah, I mean, there was this was herbology, things like that was a big part of medieval medicine.
How did he use it?
A variety of, I don't know. I gotta look into that.
Chop it up and put it on potatoes and roast them.
Yeah, and then there's a few other ways. Yeah. But yeah, this was actually, I don't even like saying medieval because it seems like it was Greek, it was ancient, and it was probably influenced by Indian culture because of the trade routes. The Greeks and the Indians were I think, and the Chinese were in regular communication.
I totally thought you were gonna say like essential oils.
I mean, I'm sure there's something like that too.
Well, because it's just distillation of those herbs and stuff that they would use. So that's what I thought that's where I thought you were going. And I was like,
when I was in the left, essential oils wasn't as big of a thing yet. I don't remember.
I don't think it's a left thing though. I love essential oils. I got plenty.
A chick thing.
It might be a chick thing, but oregano oil was my favorite because that antiviral.
Really what was it? The one song? She's going to change the world with her yoga pants and her knowledge of essential oils. Just going to calm everybody down.
It's true.
You got too much fire. That's like
you just need some lavender.
You got too much fire going on. You need more earth in you, like the four elements. That was a part of medieval science as well.
See?
Yeah. I might have to make a joke about essential oils on Sunday. I'll be curious how that goes over.
Be like, it's just the new form of the ancient. Use of herbs. It's condensed.
But it's funny because I have a lot of parishioners who are doctors, and so it'll actually be kind of fun because a lot of doctors they don't ever. I mean, to be fair, I mean, it's not like these ideas should be studied, but they don't study the history of medicine as much, or they study it very cursory.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it'll be kind of fun being like talking about the history of medicine.
Yeah.
I might nerd out.
And things keep progressing, so they have to keep learning. So going backwards is probably hard.
Well, they're probably, I mean, actually, it's funny. Part of why I got into this a little bit was, so I had an insight from a very specific conversation early on, like 5 years ago. I had this insight of doing like prayer interviews, like talking with people about their prayer lives and trying to get a sense of where they were, purgative, illuminative, and unitive. What were they experiencing contemplation? I developed like 50 questions that I would walk through, and I only ended up doing like 4 of them. And I started with people that I thought were pretty advanced spiritually. And I'll never forget, there was this one guy I was talking to, very serene, holy man. And I asked him, what do you do when you're stressed? And there's a reason why I asked that. But he said a variety of things. But one thing that stuck with me, that got me thinking about this medieval wisdom, was he said, I eat vegetables. Vegetables calm me down. I was like, I've thought about this a lot recently, because now if I'm really stressed out, if I eat a can of like vegetable soup, like it does calm me down. Like, I mean, but like if I reach for like chocolate or something like that, it won't have the same effect. Because it's not just like a hunger calorie things. It's like the kind of food. And then that's why I started thinking about maybe there's something to this Indian idea of like certain kinds of food affect you psychologically. I wrote a thing on it, some maxims that I've been reflecting on. And it seems like it's a perennial wisdom that really there's not any direct way of studying that scientifically. Because I've talked with doctors about this, and they're like, I mean, how are you going to set up an experiment to test that out? Right. I mean, like, do you become?
I would do it like, for me, it would be like a brain scan neurological study.
Yeah.
Like eating and seeing what changes in the brain.
But this is where I've talked to doctors. They say to get that funded, you have to pay for it. And you have to.
Oh, well, yeah.
You have to find a way to make money. You have to find a way to make money off of it. Like,
Nobody makes money from selling vegetables.
Exactly. And I don't think that it's just woe is us and we're in a capitalist society, and if we were communists, we would study vegetables more. I mean, I think it's just,
I doubt it.
It's just part of the, yeah, exactly. I don't think there's
study how to grow vegetables would be a good study.
But that's part of where health, and maybe this is something to talk about. Health is more than just like science. There's a certain wisdom to health that sometimes can't be reduced to like empirical research. Like
and wisdom, everybody's different. Like how I eat would not be good for everybody, and how everybody else eats, it's not good for me. So
it's actually funny. I don't eat that much meat anymore. I mean, I eat far less meat than I did like a year or two ago. But
meat and cheese and some cooked veggies.
Yeah,
that's all I got.
All right. Well, we're at time. We didn't ask for intentions. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Sorry. And hopefully we didn't piss everybody off.
We did, forgive us, please.
Yeah. But all right. So in the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless those who will watch or listen to this. We pray for their intentions. We also pray for our families, for our communities. We ask you to bless all who will watch or listen in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.